In this video, we will discuss encapsulation and access modifiers in C++ classes and object. So let's start by creating a class, and I'll say class like this, and now I need to give it a name. Let's say I'm creating a student class like this. So now what I did is I created a class called student. Now what a class could have is data members, and data members are variables or simply attribute of each object of a class. So a student class object, what could it have? Well, usually a student could have a name, so I'll say full name like this. And a student could have an age, so int age. These are the attributes or data members of the student class. Now let me go down here in the main and create a student object. To do this, what you need to do is say student like this, because this class could be treated as a type, because in the end, classes what they are simply user-defined type. So I could say student like div and give this a name. So student1 like this. So what I did now is I created a object called student1 of type student. Now what I could do with this object is I could access these data members by using the dot notation. Let me try it. So I'll say student1 dot, and as you can see, nothing works. Well, usually it should work because we need to access these data members, but right now it's not working. Why? Because these data members are set to private, and a private data member means that you cannot access this data member outside the class, and private is an access modifier that hides something from the outside. So right now I cannot access these data members because they are private. I can only access them inside the class and not outside the class. Now how should I fix this? Well, what I could do is I first of all need to set these data members to public. And what is public? Public is an access modifier similar to private, but the difference is that it sets the data members public, meaning you can access them inside the class and as well as outside the class. Let's go ahead and see it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say public right here, and I'm going to wrap these data members inside the public access modifier like this. Okay. Now let's go ahead and try the dot notation to see if we can access these data members. So I'll say student1 dot. As you can see, I am now able to access these data members because why? They are first of all set to public. And what public means is that you can access these data members inside the class as well as outside the class. Let me say, so for example, student1 dot full name, and now I'll set this equal to John. So what I did here is I set the full name attribute of the student1 object to John. Now, let me go ahead and do the same thing for age. So I'll say student1.age, and I'll set this, for example, to 19, for example. Now what I could do is I could re-access them like this to simply display them on the console. So I'll say cout again, and I'll say student1 like this dot age to check what is the age of the student. Now let's run our code. As you can see, after running this code, you can see that the student name is John and the age of the student is 19. So now this perfectly works. Now what if I go ahead and say student again here? I'm creating another object of type student. So I'll say student2. Well, what do you think? Will this student2 have these same values of student1? Well, definitely not. Let's see why. Well, basically right here we said student1.fullname. We use this object to call this attribute, and we set this value to this attribute that belongs to this object. So basically internally inside the memory, what will happen is that the compiler will create these objects, and each object of this student class will have these data members. But that doesn't mean that each object of this student class will have the same value, because each data member, or excuse me, each object will have a different attribute and a different value. So if I go ahead and say student2 right here and say dot full name, what I could do is I could set a value like David. So it doesn't have the same value as the first object, which is student1. So remember, each object of this class will definitely have these data members or variables or attributes, but of course they won't have these same values. Okay, now let me go ahead and delete the student2 object like this and like this. Now there's a common practice that you should not set data members as public. You should always keep them as private. What I'm doing here is I am encapsulating like this, or I am hiding these data members from the outside. So right now I cannot access these data members outside the class. As you can see here, I am getting errors because it is inaccessible. So what I'm doing here is I'm encapsulating or hiding the data members. This is encapsulation, when you hide data members from the outside. And now you're going to tell me, how will I able to access these data members or modify them? Well, this is where I will introduce you to getters and setter functions. Now, what is a getter and a setter? Well, let's start by seeing what they are. First of all, because these functions I want to be able to use them outside the class, what I need to do is I need to set them as public. So when something is set as public, you can access it inside that class it was defined in, as well as you can access it outside the class it was defined in. So you can access it inside the main by using the dot notation followed by the object, of course. Now let's go ahead and discuss the getter function. Now what is a getter function? A getter function simply is a function that fetches a data member and returns it. So how to do this? Well, basically I want to return the full name of the object or the student. What I'll say is I'll first of all define the return type of the object, which will be, or excuse me, the function, which will be a string, and I'll say get full name like this. Now what I'll say is return full name. This is a getter function because it returns a certain piece of data for us. Now let's do the same thing for the age. So if I want to create a getter function that returns for me the age of the student, what I'll say is I'll say int get age like this, and I'll say return age. What I did here is I created a getter function that simply returns the age of the user, or excuse me, the student. Now what is a setter function? A setter function is simply a function that changes these data members or modifies them. So what I will do is I'll say void set full name like this, and I should give it a new name, right? So I'll say string new name. What I will do is I will say full name of the student will be changed to the new name given. So like this, what I'm doing is I am setting or modifying an attribute or a data member, which is full name, right? So this is a setter function. It modifies a certain attribute. Now let me go ahead down here, say void set age. So I'm changing the age of the student. And of course, I need a new age, so new age. What I will do here is I'll say age equal to new age. So I'm changing or modifying the age of the student. So now let's go ahead and test these functions. I will go down here and I need to delete all of this because now all my data members are encapsulated or set as private. What I will do is I'll say student1 dot and I will use set full name and I want to give it a name. So John Smith like this. Now let me go ahead and give the student1 an age. So I'll say student1 dot set age like this and I'll say 19 for example. Now let me go ahead and access these data members. So I'll say something like student1 dot and I will use the getter function which is called get full name, which will return me the name of the student. Now I'll say something like student1 dot get age, which will return for me the age of the user or the student, excuse me. Now let's go ahead and test this out. Let's see if it will work. So I'll compile and launch. As you can see, it completely works. We set a full name for this student, which will be John Smith, by using the setter function called set full name. We set the age of the student 1, which will be 19. And now what we did here is we used a getter function to be able to access the data member called full name right here because it is encapsulated. And so what we did here is we used a setter function or setter functions in order to change or modify the values of the data member. And we used here getter functions in order to fetch a certain data member. And as you can see, we were able to fetch successfully these two data members. So now a simple wrap up. When you want to use functions outside a class, you should always set them to public, right? Just like what we did for these getters and setters functions. Now, always you need to remember that you need to set your data members to private in order to encapsulate them or simply hide them, okay? This is a very common practice to do. And so this is it for today's video. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date for the next C++ tutorial video. And now thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next video.